Good afternoon, parents. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Professor Cohen Guo, and I am a clinical psychologist and director of Wellness Clinic. When I am not seeing my young patients, they range in age from 5 to 16 years old, I am lecturing at the local universities or working in my SHEESH community. I am honored to be giving the first lecture since the Parents Education Act 2023 was passed in January. As a practicing psychologist for 2 decades, my areas of expertise include anxiety disorders, trauma, and depression. I have personally seen many cases of young children whose behavior is so concerning that their parents are at their wits' end when they bring their children to see me in my clinic. And the most common cause is stress, brought about by studies. There are many types of anxiety children will develop in school, arising from too much homework, upcoming tests, participating in class, being made fun of, just to name a few. Stress can intensify closer to exam periods. School children are paying a heavy price for Singapore's success in global education rankings. The number of suicides among youths aged 10 to 29 hit a record high of 112 cases in 2021, up by 11 cases from the year before. Parents, if this does not make you sit up, I do not know what will.
Okay, Cohen, I'm just gonna interrupt you for a while. When you hold your paper, try and hold it stable because at the moment it's slapping against the microphone. Okay, so put it to the side. You're doing very well. Okay, keep going.
Today, I would like to dive deep into the matter and try to evaluate it as objectively as possible, tapping on my knowledge as the Singapore education landscape that comes from my background as a teacher in MOE schools for 8 years at the start of my career, and now as a psychologist who regularly counsels and advises children and youth. Your children's learning journey is regularly punctuated by streaming, in which students are sorted into different academic programs based on their performance in standardized exams. The PSLE is the first major hurdle. The PSLE Sacred Cow has been around since 1960. That is 63 years. The first batch of students to take the PSLE are now 75 years old and have probably witnessed their grandchildren sit the PSLE too. These grandparents grew up in a vastly different time from their grandchildren. Education at all levels are evolved dramatically since then. From early childhood education to university level education, the current generation of students is completely different from the previous generations, having been exposed to technology since birth. They learn differently from their parents and grandparents, and it is high time for assessment methods to keep up with the times. Exam smartness will only go so far. Education systems should be imparting adaptive skills for individuals to thrive in a fast-changing world and digital age. The standards then and now are vastly different. We have seen in recent years parents complaining that certain PSLE papers are so difficult, even the parents cry along with the children after the papers. In media reports, a parent described the 2019 PSLE math paper as harrowing, unreasonably tough, leaving their child defeated, crushed, and utterly demoralized. This creates more anxiety and panic for cohorts that follow. It inevitably means that in addition to long days at school and hours of homework, school children are being pushed by parents to have private tuition, which is having an impact on their mental well-being, all for the sake of the PSLE regarded by parents and teachers as crucial because success often means access to prestigious schools that offer better chances at moving up the academic chain into junior colleges and subsequently universities. So the stakes are definitely higher now than in the grandparents' and parents' generation. 75% of respondents in a recent survey felt that PSLE results carry far too much weight in determining a student's life. Singapore is one of the few countries in the world to have a high-stakes examination for children as young as 12. Children are being forced to mature too fast without the relevant foundation and reasoning power to reassure themselves. In a meritocratic society, talent and ability are prized over wealth and circumstances of birth, a system which worked for the pioneer generation of Singaporeans. But that is not the case anymore. Now, families spend no effort investing in the next generation, like enrichment classes for children starting at a tender age, so that they are better prepared when they start primary 1. Expenditure on private tuition and other educational courses vary widely by household income. 51% of Singaporeans with children enrolled in tuition spend more than $500 a month per child. This figure is way beyond the means of low-income families, putting their children at a disadvantage when it comes to preparing for major examinations like the PSLE. So paying parents become the major determinant of a child's examination performance. Children from affluent families who already have an unfair advantage in primary school admissions because their parents can afford to buy a home in a more affluent neighborhood just to be closer to a brand-name school, can afford to attend brand-name tuition centers who promise PSLE success. All this points to the need for the PSLE to be abolished. It is too stressful for students, parents, and teachers. Academic excellence counts for nothing if your child does not have good physical and mental health. It is no longer relevant. The PSLE is perceived as an end in itself instead of the preparatory step towards the next phase of education. For those who ask what the secondary school placement, we do not need PSLE results to decide secondary school placement. Instead, we can use a combination of proximity to a child's home and random lottery after dividing Singapore into 10 zones, for instance, and relocating brand-name schools so that each zone will have at least one brand-name school in it. Of course, this will result in the removal of choice, but this is a trade-off parents should be willing to make if they care about the long-term mental health of their children, and for Singapore to be one step closer to being a true meritocratic society. We are not compromising education standards by doing away with the PSLE. Most school systems in the world have a high-stakes examination at age 15 or 16. Singapore has the O-levels and the other examinations higher up the academic ladder. That is when most youngsters are beginning to discover what they are good at and where their interests lie. Moreover, qualifications become more necessary only at higher levels for international comparability, for employment or entry into tertiary institutions overseas. In years past, then Education Minister 𝗬𝗄𝘃 has stressed the importance of teaching 21st century competencies such as the ability to work in teams and connect with people from other cultures. Not to mention nurturing values and character. The PSLE does not test any of this. There are many types of assessments in education besides summative assessments. Examinations alone can be too narrow in focus and only test a limited range of skills and knowledge. They may not be an accurate reflection of the student's knowledge and ability. A robust assessment system will include diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments in a comprehensive plan. In the best assessment systems, there's a strong focus on growth, not proficiency or mastery. Towards this end, and among policy changes the MOE has introduced in recent years to move away from an overemphasis on academic results, and the removal of mid-year examinations for primary and secondary schools, which results in more time for schools to design and provide a variety of learning experiences. The aim is to strengthen students' intrinsic motivation to learn and help them become more self-directed in learning. For example, teachers can check their students' understanding and mastery through regular assignments, quizzes, and classroom interactions. These touchpoints can provide useful and timely feedback for students to improve learning and enable teachers to nimbly adjust teaching practices to better support their students. While removing the mid-year examinations is a big step towards shifting the focus away from grades, why don't we take a giant leap forwards and remove the PSLE exam as well? Schools, educators, and parents have important roles to play in preparing our children for the future. In addition to the values, skills, and knowledge taught in the classroom, it is also important that our children have an enjoyable educational experience where they have the time and space to discover their strengths and become independent lifelong learners. This should be the primary aim of education. The Program for International School Assessment, PISA, is a worldwide study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. It's a member and non-member nations intended to evaluate educational systems by measuring 15-year-old school students' scholastic performance on mathematics, science, and reading. It was first performed in 2000 and then repeated every 3 years. Its aim is to provide comparable data with a view to enabling countries to improve their education policies and outcomes. It measures problem solving and cognition. Singapore may have ranked an impressive second in the latest 2018 PISA rankings, but it also had the latest percentage of students, 78%, agreeing or strongly agreeing with the phrase, "when I'm failing." This makes me doubt my plans for the future. The OECD said that the optimal learner is high in work mastery and low in fear of failure. MOE responded that their fears could stem from the desire to do well in national examinations, and that it was already in the process of reducing students' fear of failure by encouraging students to move away from an emphasis on academic results to the new PSLE scoring system. The wider scoring brands of the AL system that replaced the T-score system began with the 2021 PSLE exam. However, I do not see a reduction in fear or stress experienced by students who sat for the PSLE in the 2 years under the new scoring system. Instead of looking at tweaking the PSLE scoring system, we should have scrapped the PSLE totally. If we look at other education systems that fare well in global rankings that do not have an emphasis on educational achievement, high stakes, standardized testing, and the normalcy of competition, we can perhaps learn a thing or two Finland is one such country. Finnish students do not have a national standardized high-stakes test until they matriculate upper secondary school, and then only if they intend to enter higher education. Famous for its no minimal homework and no mandatory testing policies, students in Finland also spend just about 5 hours per day in school, starting anywhere from 9 to 9:45 a.m. Teachers use the extra time to build curriculums and access their students. Children spend far more time playing outside. There are no lists of top-performing schools. It is not an environment of competition, but one of cooperation. Having tutors is also unheard of. I believe we can replicate the Finnish education system in Singapore with a few tweaks. Reforms will take time to bear fruit, but together, MOE, parents, and the wider community can work together to change mindsets and build a culture where our children are self-directed in their learning, develop more holistically, and find joy in the process. I've come to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? If there are no other questions,
Dr. Guo, I agree with you that there needs to be. Cohen, try to move your paper away from your mic. Yeah, so leave the paper down. Okay, good. All right, so don't touch the paper. Good. So Dr. Guo, I totally agree with you that we should move towards a culture that is more akin to the Finnish system. Do you feel optimistic that we can really change society's mindset in Singapore? Because all it takes is a big enough group of parents who are still highly competitive to create enough pressure such that the other parents continue on this very competitive track that we see in Singapore. Do you have optimism that Singaporean parents can really change?
yes, I believe so. Because the parents who have children who want to take pressure off the children cannot associate with the very competitive parents. And if all parents try to do the same, then yeah, it can change. So yeah, I think that it will be able to happen.
Thank you.
Yes, Hongwei.
What happens to the people who would not like to study and would just like to play? And what happens to them afterwards, after their educational path?
After the educational path, they won't be so educated, but at least they won't be so stressed. But we still have to push them to study a bit, as it can help them in the future.
What if their qualifications do not help them to have a survival, to make a living?
That is why that other than playing, you should also study a lot. But don't study too much, as it can be really stressful for you. Yes, Ray.
Because I would like to bring up one point that you mentioned, saying that for the choosing of secondary school, there's not a need for choices, as you will look at the proximity of the child's home. What if for example, the area of the school, the area has less children and they are deprived of kids from around the other areas also? How would you manage that?
When they divide Singapore into 10 zones, they'll make sure that there's an equal amount of children and schools in each area.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? Yes, Hongwei.
What if there's higher potential students who really want to study but is surrounded around of students who do not want to study?
As long as they can focus on their own studies and block out the distraction of the other students, they'll be able to be successful in their studies.
Would all the students be taking the same level?
Yes, so that it'll be fair for everyone. If there are no other questions, thank you for listening. I hope you have learned something.
Excellent. Well done.